Hello, my name is Chantel Garcia. I chose to interview my father, Chandra Haas. I thought this would give me a good opportunity to learn more about his history and his upbringing. Growing up, he was very closed off, so I thought this would be a good chance to understand where he was coming from. I chose him instead of my mother. My mother lived in Fiji for 12 years, and my father lived there for 27 years before moving to the United States. My thesis is I want to understand the way Indian Fijian cultures communicate with elders and how Fijians convey respect. When looking at the textbook, I used chapter 10 where it explains one of the three primary dimensions used by people throughout the world to interpret interpersonal communication messages. Affiliated is used by members of cultures to interpret the degree of friendliness and a social warmth and respect. Vijay Nandu writes the report Fijians, the Challenges and Opportunities of Diversity, explains the different cultural backgrounds of Indians and Indian Fijians. When looking at the Indian culture, the role of the women is to stay at home and do household duties and raise children, whereas the men go out and work and make money. Indian Fijians' households were more community-based and close-knit. Respecting elders in the Indian culture, there was a practice to show respect is touching their feet, elders' feet for blessing. And whereas the Fijian cultures, there's a ceremony called grog, where the families come together as a community and they drink a kava. It's a root basically. The ceremony helped reinforce the family bonds. When somebody offered you a drink, you did not turn it down, because if you turned it down, you're disrespecting your elders. Some references I used to help carry out the interview to understand the Fijian culture was, for the basic information, I looked on the website Fijian High Commission to the United Kingdom, and another source that I used was Devjyot Ghoshal, The Forgotten Story of the Indian Colonial Slave Works, who began leaving home 180 years ago, to understand the surge of the migrating Indians to Fiji. Another article I used was Calypso's article, Fijians and Fijians Indians, a cultural contact problem with the South Pacific. It shows what was going on the island at the time in 1959 when my dad was living on the island. The way that my grandparents decided to raise him shows the tensions that was going on between Fijians and the Indian Fijians and the islanders. Another good reference that I used was Gilliam L.K, the Fijian Indian challenges to the European dominance in 1920 to 1946, to understand the structures that was going behind in the Fijian culture, and explains the history of the Fijians and the migration to the Fiji Island. The book broke down what was happening and the problems overseas, and explains the culture and the history and the surge of why there was a lot of Indians in Fiji. So this book helped me navigate through the question. Gilliam L. explains Fiji would have taken as many Indian immigrants as the economy demanded. In the period covered by the book, in the Fiji Indian were seen in London, in India, and in Fiji. Your parents being first-generation Fijians, what impact did they have on them, on you raising you?
Like what?
So, your parents were first-generation Fijians. What impact did they have?
It depends on which way you are looking at it. Let's say they got that from their parents. So we go whatever I would say, what do you call it? The hardworking, all this type. So the parents usually tell us to work hard and study. So that's basically what it comes out to, be working hard and studying hard to be successful in life.
Devjyot shares a story of the forgotten story of Indians, colonial slave workers who began leaving home in 180 years ago. Explains the story behind the immigration of Indians. He explains how British Empire and sends Indians for laborers. The laborers who arrived in Fiji, Lot notes, were a diverse group of encompassing a wide range of home districts, family structures, and caste system. Did your parents share why you were born in Fiji?
Basically, they did, but at least as far as we understand, we knew that our parents did tell us a little bit about my grandparents, that they came from India and they worked really hard there to get up 3 in the morning, be in the field by 4, and they work till dark, sometime 8, and they'll come home and then they'll have a group, they'll sing and have a good time, and that's it. And they'll, again, the thing continues, and I think after the period ended, my grandfather decided that he'll just stay back in Fiji. That's the story as far as I know, which was told by my parents. So he stayed back and then he got married in Fiji. So my dad was the eldest son and he had 11 brothers and sisters. So he was the eldest son, and my grandfather passed away before I was born. So he did give me the name before he died.
What was the name?
My name? Well, he made sure that I will be named Chandra Haas, which means, well, I don't have to go into details of that.
Tell me a story about your childhood growing up in Fiji.
Well, as far as it was pretty good. It's not like nowadays, but yeah, at that time we didn't have anything. So we'll be playing outside all the time, run wild in the jungle, bush, do whatever we want. We didn't have to worry about anything. The whole village was just like our village. So the whole village, if you go to anyone's house, it's just like your house. Nowadays you can't do that. So that's the difference when we were growing up.
So it was more of a community living?
Yeah, it was most of less like the place we were raised up. We didn't have any caste system there, but it was pretty good. We had, let's put it this way, we had, if you want the religious base, we had all different kind of religion in our village. Just like South Indians, Muslims, and any kind of festivals, we'll just share it among each other, which was pretty neat. Nowadays, it's very hard.
Tell me a typical day was when you were in primary school.
Well, most of the time we were playing around, but yeah, we had a lot of chickens, goats, bullocks, cattle, so we had to raise them. We have to make sure we have to feed them. Feed them, let's say 12, we have to go make sure take them to the creek, they drink water, and then we tie them again. And then in the evening we have to go get them home. In the morning, then you go back, tie them. So.
What was a typical day in school, in primary school?
In school, it was pretty good. We had to walk, I would say, close to 2 miles to get to the school. The school was multiracial at that time. The natives were very few in the school that time. Back in 60s, it was still the black and white system. But then that time, as far as I remember, they used to have separate bathrooms for white, and for brown and black people will have different. But we have a lot of multiracial, I would say, as far as, a lot of multiracial. We had a lot of different kinds of people. We had white, black, brown. in the school in the morning, what we'll do, we'll start with the ceremony. They'll have a ceremony. Then we'll have a physical education. Then we're in the classes. Then lunch. We'll play soccer. I would say that time soccer was the most famous, and native rugby, which was not that popular that time. Mostly soccer and cricket were the most famous. It looks like our grandparents and before them they brought that game from India. Plus we had we had our own games, which you call it, what you call nowadays is baseball. It was similar to cricket, and we used to play, it's a similar game, Tin Pani they call it. We used to play some native, we'll just invent something to waste our time, that's it.
We make assumptions that cultures of the same background have the same style of communication. However, that is not the case for Fijians and Indo-Fijians. They are not the same. Tell me a story when you went to town.
Oh yeah, the difference is at that time, when we were growing up, we were not, let's say, we didn't know what black, white, brown, all these colors, we didn't even care about that. We just grew away, just as long as you're a human being, that's it. And when we went to town, the town that time was not like the modern days. You only have our store here and then a couple of miles, maybe another store. But it was nothing was what you see is modern. Even in town we'll have, just like if you go in a countryside, mostly that type we grew up.
But you stated that there was blacks and whites that was.
Oh yeah, in the bathrooms they will have, in the town even there, the bathrooms, which was segregated. Let's say whites only, and the other side will be Negroes and Browns. As far as I remember, that was but I still remember that there was only, I'm talking about city of Lautoka in Fiji Island. That time the market area was where the restroom was. There was only one restroom, and which I still visit Fiji, and I still remember the old guest house is still there, and close to the guest house, that I think it's a Yasawa Street as far as I remember, very soon the bus stand and the Naviti Street, where it meets Yasawa Street right now, in current I think it's a city mall there. That used to be lined with all mango trees. That used to be the bus stand. And the population was not that much. Still we were mostly in the urban areas. I don't want to go into details.
Did you look for your parents' approval?
Yeah, we have to get our parents' approval anyway. To go, you have to take the parents. We respect our parents. We'll never argue with them. Whatever they say, whether it's right or wrong, that's it goes. No if and no buts.
According to Vindu New Fiji, the challenge and opportunities of diversity states that there is mutual understanding and respect for each other. How did you share this practice with your children?
Oh, that's a lot of different. In our time, if our parents say anything, that's it. Whatever they approve, it's approved. But nowadays, the kids here, my kids, I just gave them free time. I told them to make their own decisions. So, you go with the changing times.
What did you want to be when you were a child?
Just go, be happy, lucky, and travel the world. And that's what I tell my kids too. And they do that. My little one, she travels the world.
Who had the most influence on you when you were growing up?
We didn't have role. We just look up to our elders, mostly the village elders of my dad, my uncles. As far as I remember, my uncle, he used to travel back in 60s. He used to travel from Fiji to New Zealand. They used to go do labor. Mostly at that time, the employment was very hard in Fiji. So my uncle used to go to New Zealand to pick up the fruits, mostly apples. They'll go for 3 months, fruit season. They'll go pick apples and they'll come and then again next year.
Can you tell me a story between you and your dad?
Well, my dad was a hard-working guy. He used to just, as far as I remember, he'll leave. They used to, that time there was no bus service as far as I remember, and they'll walk to go to work. That time my work was working for CSR, that's nowadays it's called Fiji Sugar Corporation. Used to be Australian sugar mills. So I used to work for them. He was a carpenter by trade. So they will walk to town, I would say close to 5 miles day, morning and afternoon. And then as he went up the ladder, then he bought a bicycle and he'll use his bicycle to go to work. And then after then, the bus service started. So as the country progressed.
Share a story where both your parents were proud of you.
Well, the parents that if we do any kind of work, if we complete it on time, they'll be happy for us. As far as I remember, my dad was building a food shelf. And I think I was maybe 10, 11 years, I'm not sure. So what I'll do, I'll try to imitate him. Whatever he did a big job, I'll do a small project. So I remember that when he built a wood food shelf, I did a tiny one. And then I sold that one. People wanted more. So that gave me encouragement. And so whatever my dad built a big one, I'll make sure I do the copy and make a small one.
May you share a recent conversation between you and your mom?
Oh, my mom used to get along very fine. Anything we need, we'll talk to mom, tell her. Because we were scared of dad. Dad will say no or something. So we'll just try to talk with mom and she'll pass the message to dad. Which my kids still do now.
What role did your mom play in the house?
Oh, mom was busy because we had a big family. We were, as far as I remember, we were growing up, we had 22 in our family, 22 family members. All the family members used to stay together. So mom was busy. She has to cook for all 22 people. She was elder in the family. She'll cook for the whole family. And then they have to finish the job by 8 or 9. Then they have to go and walk in the fields, come back by 2 or 3 and start cooking. So they had a hard life that time, as far as I remember.
What role did you play in your house?
Oh, we used to, our job was mostly to go and gather the firewood. We'll go in the jungle, get some dry firewood so they can cook. We usually cook outside. And then in the morning we had to go tie our goats, feed the chickens, tie the kettles, milk the cows. So we had a busy life when we were growing up.
Share a story how you communicated with your parents when you moved.
Well, when I moved, we used to communicate with writing letters because that time a lot of things had changed. We gained independence in 1970, and after that things changed. And Fiji was progressing very fast. So we used to communicate with the writing letters, but after a couple of years, then we got the telephone service. With the telephone rate was very high at that time.
In conclusion, I found myself relating to my father a lot more, carrying out some of the Indian Fijian cultures. However, we do differ from one another as well. My self-orientation is Indo-Fijian, but my personal identity differs from the others in the cultural group. I mix it in with my American side, being born and raised in California. We differ from my dad living in a communal living style, whereas I was raised in just my immediate family, just my grandparents living with us. And once I got married, I did not move in with my in-laws, whereas in the Indian Fijian culture, you do live with your in-laws once you are married. Some of the cultural beliefs that I relate to my father was the touching of the feet of elders for the respect. This is a cultural norm for the Indian Fijian culture, however, not for other cultures. The interpersonal relationship among people different cultures occurs as a result of knowledge and perception that people have about one another. When I was getting married, I explained to my soon-to-be mother-in-law of this practice of touching the feet to show respect. I explained to her after the wedding ceremony was over, I would be touching her feet for blessing. She was a little bit weirded out for this was not being a cultural norm for her. Another cultural belief that me and my father share was the grog time after my wedding was over. The next day we celebrated grog time with my husband's family. Both families got together in a cross-cultural communication, sharing kava and stories. It was a unique experience of sharing cultural history. I'm a little bit different from my father, who is time-oriented to guide him throughout his life. His behaviors are guided through past experiences, whereas I am more of the present and I choose decisions based on the immediate circumstances. Another thing that we differ is my dad respects elders, whereas I am more direct and in elders' faces and asking why we do things and how, and testing them. Throughout this process, what I learned about this interview was how to communicate to someone and learn about his or her culture. Throughout this process, I analyzed how culture influences interactions with one another and cross-culturally. I saw how Indo-Fijians evaluate communication practices that lead to intercultural